Everyone wants to go a bit faster. At the end of the day, if you just bring it back down to that, do you know what I mean? Then that's kind of a bit of a common language you can speak with everyone.
I love riding a road bike as fast as I can. You just can't beat it. I'm sure most of you watching feel the same way. But how do you ride faster? Well, in some ways it's fairly easy. Buy some deep section wheels, an aero frame, a skin suit, an aero helmet, and away you go. But the best way to really go fast on a bike is to train the engine, your legs, your heart, and your lungs, the body. And the best way to do that is with a power meter. Now, it's easy to think that only top level cyclists and pros need power meters, and normal people like you and I can't benefit from a power meter. But that's wrong, and I'm here to show you how you can benefit from a power meter. And to help me out, I've enlisted the help of an ex-professional cyclist and now a full-time cycling coach, James Spragg, gives some expert insight into how you and I can benefit from a power meter. So let's dive in.
You don't need a power meter per se. People improved their cycling performance before we had power meters, you know? So you can improve without a power meter. Is it going to help? And is it going to give you information to sort of inform that process? Definitely. So whenever we look at training, there's probably three things that we should look at. How hard it felt. So your RPE, so people, 1 to 10, where is it on that scale? How hard was your body working? So that's your heart rate, basically. And how much power was your body producing? And once we know those three things, we can see changes. So let's say, let's say you're riding at 200 watts, and a month ago your heart rate was 150 beats per minute, and now it's 140 beats per minute. We know that's an improvement. You've got more efficient. You're doing less internal work for more external work. So without the power meter, it's very difficult to assess the changes in performance.
When I talk about speed, I don't mean flat out max speed. We're not trying to be Mark Cavendish here, are we? We're not sprinting. Well, you might be, but I'm not. I'm talking about speed in terms of speed over a long distance and riding faster for longer without tiring out or hitting a wall, bonking, or blowing up. And I actually have an ulterior motive for this video and for using James Spragg to help me train for an event in the summer, an event called the Fred Whitten, which some of you watching might be familiar with, but basically it's a really rock hard sportive in the Lake District with lots and lots of really steep climbs. I'm talking about 33% in places. And the easiest way for me to get fit and ready for this event is to ride up more hills like this one here. But I plan to use a power meter to make sure I train as well as I can, to make the best use of the time I have available to get the maximum gains possible, to make sure, hopefully, fingers crossed, I arrive at the start line on a Fred Whitten in the summer in the best possible shape. Not so I can get around in a super quick time, but so I can enjoy the event and not blow up on the first or the second or penultimate climb, but get around and hopefully finish with a smile on my face. So that is a plan.
In the lead up to that event, you can track your progress. So, you can have a test hill that's close to you and you can ride up that hill, maximal effort. Let's say you do 300 watts and then a month later you do 310 watts, and a month later you do 320 watts. You know that the form is improving over time, and you know that, okay, I'm on track for kind of my goal event. And in terms of the individual sessions, it will allow you to target the kind of physiological adaptations within those sessions a little bit better. So let's say, we want to work on some kind of, when we typically do intervals, we're talking about riding above threshold, FTP, whatever you want to kind of call that, because that induces a whole kind of myriad of changes within the muscle cell, which kind of kick off a process of adaptation. Now, you want to make sure that you're riding at the right intensity to kind of induce those adaptations, and you can do that by riding your power, using your power meter, tracking those efforts as you go on, making sure, okay, I want to be doing 350 watts for these efforts. Okay, I'm doing 350, I'm doing 350, I'm doing 350, etc. throughout the session.
One of the most exciting benefits of a power meter is how you can use it to pace your efforts, whether on a long ride or an individual climb, as James explains.
Obviously, Fred Whitten, relatively short in terms of like climbing length, but very steep. The temptation is going to be to smash it up those first few climbs, and then you're really going to pay for that at the end of the race. So therefore, that pacing within the event, backing off on that first climb, actually that first climb is probably going to need to feel actually pretty easy. and then you maintain that, same pacing across the entire event. And what will probably happen if you pace it right is the first climb will feel easy and the last climb will feel very, very hard, but actually you've just done the same power, for both those two climbs. So within the event itself, it's really going to help you with pacing.
When talking about power meters, you probably heard the term FTP, but what exactly does it mean?
Essentially, we're trying to determine your threshold power. Okay, so that power that's either sustainable below, power outputs below that are relative sustainable, and power outputs above that are not sustainable. Okay, and that's kind of like that's a physiological threshold, if you like. Basically, anything above that, you're in the red. Eventually, you're gonna if you carry on exercising at that intensity, you're gonna hit VO2 max, as we call it, and then you're gonna have to basically stop exercising. Anything below that is going to be relatively sustainable for, let's say 40 minutes, an hour, depending on how much lower underneath that FTP you are. So that's kind of, it separates basically exercise that you're going to end up in the red and have to stop, and exercise where probably your limiting factor is kind of, how much glycogen you've got, how much stores of energy you've got in your body.
So far then, it seems like using a power meter is a no-brainer, but do you also need a heart rate monitor as well?
Always use heart rate with your power meter.
Okay.
And I would also say, always record how hard that session felt on a scale of 1 to 10. So what we call the RPE scale. When you look back at your training, you will see changes in those three things. So let's take a ride. You do a nice steady long ride. You do it at 150 watts, for example, and your heart rate was 150. Now, if your heart rate in the next month is 140 for the same wattage, we know you've seen an improvement because you're riding at the same wattage, but you're doing less internal work, if that makes sense. So your body's not working as hard. So we haven't seen actually an improvement in the power number, but we have seen an improvement when we compare it back to the heart rate. And sometimes we will see similar in the RPEs. So let's say if you did some intervals, you did, let's say an 8-minute interval at 300 watts, it might be your heart rate and your power stay the same across time, from month to month to month. But actually, what felt like a 10 out of 10 effort in the first week might feel like a 9 out of 10 effort a month later, and an 8 out of 10 effort the week, a month after that. So actually you can see, okay, it's feeling easier, which probably means I can do more and more and more of these efforts. I can keep backing them up. So by having those three measures, one of external work, your power, how hard how much power you're putting out, internal work with the heart rate, how hard your body's having to work to produce that power, and RPU, how hard your body's finding that effort, how hard it feels. You've got a nice kind of all-rounded picture of what's going on, and you can compare those things to see change over time.
By now, you're probably, like me, feeling a bit WTF about FTP, TSS, and RPE. So maybe it's best to get a coach to help you really embrace the benefits of a power meter.
I think it's good to have someone that has a good understanding of that sort of, what the data looks like, what normal is, etc. That can help you, and a coach can certainly do that. But I also think we can keep it relatively simple. Do you know what I mean? Like you can have, let's say you've got a hill close to you, you can go up that hill with a maximal effort once a month, and you can track your progress that way. So we don't have to get too overwhelmed by TSS or normalized power or the kind of these derivatives that come out of all the power meter data. Sometimes it's a little bit, it's as simple as saying, okay, am I going up this hill faster, or am I putting out more power than I was up this hill a month ago? And okay, yes, I am. I know my kind of performance is improved.
All the talk of power meters and FTP and threshold is fine if you already have a power meter. But if you're new to the world of power meters, you're maybe looking to buy one this year, or you just bought a new bike with a power meter on, what are the first steps to set yourself up with a power meter and make sure you're using it correctly?
First thing, I would say get used to the process of calibrating that power meter. Okay. So what we call your zero offset each day. So that's like, when you have some scales, if you're doing some cooking at home, do you know what I mean? You put a different kind of bowl on that scales and you measure things into it. And it's just like hitting that zero button, for your different bowls. And what the numbers that your power meter will kick out otherwise will change based on temperature and things like that. So get used to doing that process, first of all, because then you're going to get accurate measures kind of going forward. If you don't get that process right, all your data is going to be out, kind of forever, for however long you're using that power meter. Second thing is give it a few days to settle in. Normally, you know, it takes a few days for a power meter to settle in before you start getting reliable data. Once you've done those two things, so you're used to zero offsetting it, you've ridden it for a few days, I would say, you know, relatively early on, an FTP test or something similar would be useful. Now, what are we trying to determine with that? Essentially, we're trying to determine your threshold power. Okay, so that power that's either sustainable below, you know, power outputs below that are relatively sustainable, and power outputs above that are not sustainable. Okay, and that's kind of like that's a physiological threshold, if you like. I'm personally not. I think there's better ways of measuring that than an FTP test, your standard 20-minute test. But that's what we're trying to estimate, essentially. So yeah, do your FTP test, find your FTP if you like, and then, you know, what you're trying to do is keep your interval sessions, those hard efforts that you do, you know, at it or above it, essentially. And then, you know, in that easy stuff, we want to make sure you're kind of riding easy. And I would say in those long, easy rides, you probably want to ride around less than 70% of your FTP, certainly. And that allows you to kind of get a sort of polarized training distribution where, you know, you're keeping the easy stuff easy, you're keeping the harder stuff hard. There'll obviously always be some time in the middle, but it allows you to control the training process a little bit. So get used to calibrating your power meter, get used to using your power meter, then maybe a test, and then you can use that data to kind of control your training going forward.
So it seems obvious then that a power meter really is the best way to get faster on a bike.
If you're really interested in performance, you need that measure of external work. So you need to know how much power you're putting out. So power is probably the best thing that we've got that correlates with performance. And by having those three things, so heart rate, power, and RPEs, as I kind of said earlier, they're really, you know, having those three data points allows you to control the process of improving as best as we can. Okay. The caveat to that is that at the end of the day, we're looking to go fast, not produce a lot of power. Yes, power is like the input, but there's also a lot of kind of things that take away from that and slow you down. So, you know, aerodynamics, some kind of, you know, rolling resistance, all those things, if you're not fueling right, all those things are going to slow you down. So you also need to have a look at, you know, those sort of processes or those sort of elements of performance as well, because ultimately you're trying to make athletes go fast, not produce as much power as possible.
As you can see right now, the weather is blooming marvelous, perfect for riding a bike, but it's still winter, so lots of my riding is still done indoors when the weather is grim. I'm sure it's the same for you. So I asked James if what's inside are the same as what's outside.
The numbers probably won't be the same. So there's a reason for that. So, you know, if you're comparing the power measured on your kicker compared to, I don't know, on your SRM, for example, they're two different power meters. So there's going to be inherently some difference in those two things. Now, I know some trainers you can connect them. So you can get, for example, your Wahoo kicker to measure from your own power meter. So you get, okay, this is the same value. However, you're in a different environment. So that's going to change the amount of power you can produce. So it might be that it's much hotter. And so your body's having to work much harder to kind of thermoregulate to cool yourself down. And that will affect your power. Your power will go down a little bit. The resistance that you feel on a like a smart trainer, for example, is very different to how you feel on the road. It's a lot more akin to kind of, you know, climbing up a relatively consistent sort of gradient. Obviously on the road, if you're, you know, you've got a tailwind and the bike's kind of running away from you as you're pedaling, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to produce power. So because you've changed the environment, you will change the amount of power that you can produce. Now, as long as you take that into account and you're not, you know, kind of putting your head in your hands because you can't produce the same numbers on the turbo as you are, you know, out on the road, for example, it doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, the training is still of good benefit. And actually it gives us some control over the training process sometimes. So if your ultimate goal is, to improve performance in an event or, improve longitudinally, it's not like those sessions on the turbo are not helping that. They're still helping that process. It's just maybe you're riding to slightly different numbers than you would be out on the road. So again, it comes back to bringing it back to that process and saying, okay, like, let's make this session as good as it can be with the environment that I have, with the numbers that I have today. And then, okay, as long as you keep that process going, it will improve things long term.
Right, there we are then. Hopefully that wasn't too confusing or overwhelming for you. I know it can be. It's quite a tricky subject to get your head around, but hopefully James broke it down into what really matters, the real simple fundamentals of using a power meter to benefit your riding, whether you're a amateur or a pro level cyclist. And I plan over the next few months to put everything James said into practice and get myself ready for the Fred Whitten, fingers crossed, if it all goes to plan. If you have any questions about this video or other topics in the world of power meters you want us to cover, then do put them down below in the comment section. And I plan to do a few more videos over the next few weeks and months, so hopefully we can cover some more interesting areas that are definitely worth talking about. If you want to see a review of the brand new Wahoo power meter pedals I'm using right now, check the video up here. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the button just down here, and I'll see you all again very soon. But right now I'm off to ride some new hills for me, so I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.